Okay, so here we go. Welcome to my channel. It's a cute little drawing that I made. Uh, yeah, so welcome to my channel. My name's Ananka. It's not really, but that's okay. It's besides the point. Hello. Um, and yeah, so this is what I've cooked up. A little something that I've noticed with in terms of the way the chart goes, and I just wanted to share that with everyone. Okay, so here we go. So it begins with me being instructed or suggested that I take a look at my Mars. And while I was doing that, while I was trying to sort of think of or figure out a little snafu that I was having, it occurred to me that why do we always start with Aries? I mean, it makes sense. Just kind of take a gander over here. I mean, it makes sense, of course, because that's the beginning of the year, the equinox, the whole planting thing. It makes a lot of sense. However, and it starts because of Mars, right? Mars is the initiating energy. It's that intuitive fire. And I thought, well, that's all fine and good, but Mars also rules Scorpio. And then and that's got a kind of initiating energy in and of itself because that initiates the rebirth cycle, right? And then but then after Aries, after Mars comes Venus, which is true with Scorpio, but that would be before. That would be Libra. So I kept writing it out and going along lines of like Mars, Venus, Mercury, Sun, or Moon, and it's Mercury, Venus, Mars. So I kept going. And what I noticed was that what was showing up was this. What happened was this. We ended up with Scorpio's the first, Libra, then Virgo, Leo, Cancer, Gemini, all the way down. Okay. Now you'll notice that, sorry, that's my dog. So you'll notice that when we get to the fourth house, normally that should be Cancer, right? Well, it can be Leo and then Cancer, because remember, we're going backwards. Okay. And there's a certain intelligence that happens as you go backwards. You start noticing that things start lining up in a rather peculiar fashion. Like the idea of Capricorn and Aquarius switching their house positions is also kind of interesting, right? Because we think of, 10th house should be Capricorn, that's Saturn's house. But what if it's Aquarius? And when you think about it, just sort of let that sink in, because you'll find that depending on how you think about it, at first it seems like, no, that's not right. But when you think about it, actually, it could very much be right. But it depends on for whom does this chart resonate for. Okay. Because we're told that, this Aries to Pisces is for everyone. And I just don't think that that's actually true. I think what's happening here, quite obviously, is this is a masculine chart, and this is a feminine chart. This is the divine feminine chart. And I'll explain it like this. This is how it started. Because when I first started writing this out, I was like, oh, maybe this is like a shadow work chart. And it could be, because in many ways it does shadow this chart. But when I really looked at it, I was like, no, this is definitely the woman's chart, and I'll tell you why. It's because of this middle section. I mean, the start of it is fairly obvious that there's something clearly different going on here, because when we extrapolate, it just starts to line up. But it's particularly this back and forth, the Leo Cancer, because when I looked at it, I was like, oh, okay, this must be a masculine feminine chart, because fourth house is the house of home, right? That's your safe place. Outside of yourself, it should be the next place that you feel the safest, and the idea of it being Cancer, kind of makes sense, right? Because if I'm starting off as Aries, cardinal fire, I want my home to be cardinal water so that it can soothe me. It can, maybe douse some of my hot-headedness. But that would make sense because Cancer is, that's kind of, that's mother energy, right? And where do we feel safest? We feel safest in the home with our mother. And then the fifth house would be the house of children and legacy, which makes sense because that ties into the fire, that's fixed fire, where this was intuitive. So this is initiating energy. This is cardinal fire. And then, of course, to keep its fires burning, it makes sense to have fixed fire there. Okay, so because that's your pride, that's your legacy, all of those things. That's the man's history, right? Is through his masculine heirs. So then when we go over here, what we're looking at is the fourth house is Leo, which makes sense if you're starting off at Scorpio, that your fourth house would be, again, it's the idea of that fire-water balance, right? And if you were divine feminine, it would make sense that you would want your home to be inhabited by your lion, by your protector. Because when you're giving birth, you're very vulnerable, right? So you need someone with, strength and all of that. In terms of how it resonates in your chart, that's what you require as a divine feminine. And then Cancer is going to be your legacy as a divine feminine. Griffin, can you stop, please? Thank you. All right, so then moving on, of course, Taurus would be the seventh house to Scorpio, just in the same way that Aries and Libra are balanced. And then Aries being the eighth house, well, that's a house of death for the divine feminine. But that's also where her investment is. So, eighth house being inhabited by Aries, and of course, remember, we traditionally think of it as Scorpio, but eighth house Aries, that says to me that it lines up with the Mars energy that we start, our initiating Mars energy. So our investments are going to be tied into us. But I kind of think of this in terms of like dowry, actually, because there's something about the idea of investment. It kind of opposes the second house in a way. It balances out the second house. But it's also about value, right? And I love the idea of this being the eighth house for the divine feminine, because that also is what I can rely on as well. It has a sort of self-reliance kind of vibe to it, to me. But there's the idea of investing in the self, in the head, maybe the head of your family. The investment could be there, or it could be personal, because remember, it's Mars that connects Aries and Scorpio. All right, so it comes back to the self. So to invest in others is also an investment in the self. You see that it's like a co-balancing kind of thing. Anyway, ninth house as Pisces driven. Well, it's Jupiter's house, right? So it's going to expand, but that's going to be, I was thinking that it's kind of like shamanist, like a shaman knowledge kind of thing, because Pisces still has the air of being the culmination of religions or belief systems or the whole chart. But to have it as your ninth house means that you are literally studying this whole chart, and using it as a higher knowledge, which I think is why the idea of women and being witches was so powerfully frightening. Um, because imagine if we knew these two charts existed, you know, it would it would seem to bolster. I mean, if I was a mid 1500s witch and I knew that this chart was existing, it would bolster my desire to maybe to do more witchy things, because if you know that the study of everything is how you at least ascend in your knowledge, that could be frightening to a group of people who maybe want to control things, but nonetheless. And then moving down to Saturn, ruled Aquarius and Capricorn, the 10th and the 11th house. Well, of course, that has to mirror up here, the Leo Cancer. And what I think about the idea of Aquarius being the 10th house, well, Aquarius is the water bearer, it's fixed water. So, of course, it's pulling in, it's pulling in your knowledge of self, your partnership, your home life, your partner life, and then your work life. So Aquarius being in the 10th house, so that's a water bearer, right? So, and to bear water means to basically hold the knowledge of the group, right? Because water is memory. And it being fixed means that it's not, it's at its most potent. And then, but we could also, because remember, Aquarius is also about leadership, right? Being given leadership. And then Capricorn is the 11th house. Well, the 11th house is the house of community and friendship. So, our friendships as a divine feminine, sometimes they square. Well, it'll square our sense of value, so it can pull it out. It can support it in kind of an intense way, but it can also be detrimental. And that's where the whole, being in the public and being strong in your public self is at play, because remember, 7th house, Taurus is the 7th house for this chart, right? So that both supports the 7th house, but it can also be a little bit crushing, that your public face may get in the way of your relationship, right? Either it's supported or it's not supported. But nonetheless, you see how your relationship ties into your status in the community. And I mean, the same could be said over here, right? Because 11th house is Aquarius, right? And then the 7th house is Libra. So again, it should work because it's both air. But as any Libra or Aquarius knows, we are cool until we're not cool, right? And then it can be really frustrating to deal with each other. So, there's that sort of back and forth. And then Jupiter is the last sign, at least in the 12th sign setup. And what's great about that is that if that's the last sign, then that is the idea of travel, learning other cultures, getting comfortable with all of that, being adventurous and going out there. Well, yeah, that should be the 12th house, because whereas over here with the chart that we are used to, we're already comfortable with the idea of, kind of being out there, being double fished out there, so the idea of travel is still inherent in the system that we've been working with, okay, as a final stage. But what if the final stage is actually supposed to be Sagittarius? What if it's about actually learning about the outer realms? Not just being with it, but learning about it. Because also keep in mind that Sagittarius is also, um, it's two things in one. So it's a kind of union. Okay. And it's some kind of divine union because, I mean, Sagittarians were created, centaurs were created by the gods, right? Or by a god, who knows. So yeah, so now to show you what it looks like as a circular wheel, I have one here. It's much abused because cats and things happened. So I'll just show you real quick here that this is what it looks like on a wheel, and you may want to take a screenshot of this. And yeah, so you can see how it makes sense. You know, you go from Mars, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Sun, or Sun, Moon, and then back to Mercury, Venus, all the way around. Now, interestingly enough, if you want to add in Ophiuchus and Cetus, both of them line up with this sliver here. And then, of course, they would also, so there would be a sliver here, right, between Scorpio and Sag and Aries and Pisces. So Ophiuchus and Cetus line up right over here as well as over here. So that's something to keep in mind. And because honestly, like if you think about it, the math just doesn't quite math, because if you're sorry, I literally just dropped the mic. And the math doesn't quite math, and I'll tell you why, because here's the thing. Okay, if the 7th house is halfway across from the 1st, then why aren't there 14 houses? Why do we have 12 houses? Now, pretty sure there's 14 spokes, but there's only 12 houses because, of course, the houses are the space in between. But I would argue that, you know what, maybe we are supposed to have 14 houses, but for now we're just working with 12 because mathematically it works, because there are 12 slices in the pie. It is our clock face. So, you know, to say that we couldn't handle it is just not true. So there should be no reason for the resistance. But nonetheless. So yeah, so you can see that it looks like it's going backwards, but it can still go forwards. And I'll show you one other thing too. So maybe try this out. So when we're looking at a clock, okay, you see that it's Aries, Taurus, Gemini, all the way around, right? That's the usual setup. Now, if you take that same clock and you flip it around and you put on the back of the clock the different signs. So again, it's number 1, so we start with Scorpio, and then we go to Libra and Virgo. Because sometimes visualizing things, most of the time I can do it, but every now and then I have weird little hiccups. So I came up with this. So what happens is, okay, so if we look this way, all right, and try and do this, right, so the clock moves forward, right? Now, if the clock is still moving and you turn it around, you'll see that it still turns and it hits all of, because it's still going clockwise, but when you look at the back end of the clock, that's how you see this other chart, right? Because for a while I was thinking to myself, well, it's all fine and good, except, you know, chronologically it doesn't really link up. But that's not entirely true. Because what's happened is that we've gotten more attached to the sign as opposed to the planet that rules that particular sign. And honestly, if you just stick to the planetary rulers, you'll know what sign and time we're in. But but I think it's easier to work with this than maybe originally thought. But I just thought it was interesting, just as an exercise in terms of interpreting your own chart, because like, let's say if you're you know is your Chiron in Taurus, or is it maybe in Libra? Because there are elements that are shared between these two signs because they are ruled by Venus. The signs are still separate, but they do have nuanced differences. And so I would encourage you to, maybe even set up your chart like this, like wherever your Virgo slice is, just put Gemini. Just scratch out Virgo and put Gemini. I promise you it will change how you think about whatever astrological problems you may have, and also how you interact with other people. Because if you know even just their sun sign, you know it to be one thing. Well, check the rulership and see if maybe you might do better treating them as the other sign. Okay. But people have very entrenched ideas about their signs and about what they are, so tread carefully. But if you're open to re-examination, then I would suggest you do that. And on that note, there are certain things, because of the kind of inherently reversed nature of this chart, it made me think of like, okay, well, when do we experience this? And we actually experience this other chart quite frequently in real time, because every time that there's a retrograde, the precession of the equinoxes goes backwards. The north node of the moon goes backwards. I know that there are lunar nodes to all the planets, but the main one that we work with is the moon, so that moves backwards. And then we have the retrogrades, which is an excellent opportunity for us to remember certain things. And also, I just wanted to say that, and this is physics. It's not about how one feels or anything like that. But the physics of the human body are such that masculine bodies, structural bodies, have their center of gravity in their shoulders. And in women's bodies, structural female bodies have their center of gravity in their hips. So, purely from a physics structural standpoint, we are clearly operating from different starting points. So, of course, it would make sense that Aries is the beginning of the chart for men, and that Scorpio is the beginning of the chart for women. Okay? It follows the structure. It follows the human structure. Now, how you feel and how you resonate, that can also be altered and changed. There are certain things that are, I think, endemic or intrinsic in the human psyche and body and all of that. And then there are other things that we can then layer on top and, change behaviors. It is possible for that to happen. And so, and because there are so many wonderful ways that this information is, laid out in everyone's chart, it makes for a really interesting world. Now, the reason why that's kind of important to keep in mind is that it's also why this other chart is going to resonate differently for men and for women. And have you not noticed that when you look at the usual Aries to Pisces setup, the masculine and feminine expressions of these signs can be very different. There's even the difference between time of year, like earlier in the sign versus later in the sign. There are reasons for that. There are astrological reasons for that. But I think what's kind of more important is that we've known that there was a difference and that there needed to be a clarification here for a long time. And I think this is the best way to do it, or at least it's a way that I've sort of cooked up in my apartment. I'm really interested to see what you think of it. Obviously, there's going to be more extrapolations of this, and I'll be getting more into it. And I just want to say, like, this isn't me trying to be like, oh, we need a feminist chart for astrology. Like, no, it's not that, but it definitely looks that way. But what I would more say is that it's about giving space to the other route that I think we need to pay attention to, because from what I've been sort of gleaning in my, in my dance through YouTube, trying to like find out information and stuff like that, it seems fairly obvious to me that this is the missing piece to a lot of the, particularly when it comes to the archaeological, goings on, shall we say, like all the stuff going on with the pyramids. I think if you're going to be in a chamber where there are astrological symbols, I would suggest that you turn the other way. Go the other way, okay? Because there is another chart that's hiding in plain sight, and I'm going to say that I think maybe it's what ancient Kemet was running under. And that they were actually running under more of a Scorpio-led chart and cosmology, and that the Aries Pisces came in and took over. And understandably so, because they share so many, like if you listen to the, if you understand the process of the, I'll just use older language here, the Egyptian Osiris mythology, like that whole process is literally this layout described. And there's a video called Heavy is the Crown, I think. It looks fairly recent. I just watched it last night. I'll try and link it in the description. Yeah, I think it's around an hour and 22 minutes, and where they're describing the death process and the process of weighing your heart against a feather. Like this whole process is delineated. It kind of like, it made me jump a little. Anyway, I have to go. So I hope this video finds you well. And of course, if you have any questions, just throw them into the comments. I'm just going to put this out there. I did not do any editing. And try and see if I can do this before my next appointment. And yeah, so there you have it. There's a lot more to it, but I just thought I'd give this to the world, let people sort of chew on it. And yeah, all right. And try out the clock thing. I think you'll get a kick out of that. All right. Chowder.